We now have our next speaker. The gentleman is Neil Dogra. Neil contacted me in several months ago. Neil is a student at the university school. He's put together a really thoughtful presentation that he is now working with Milwaukee Public Schools. Part of the recommendations of the task force is to talk about peer-to-peer discussions, whether it's recovering addicts or addicts helping each other, but also prevention of having young people talk to young people about what's going on in terms of the area of opiates. And quite honestly, I was so impressed by this young man and his presentation. He's only a sophomore, right?
That's correct.
That I felt that it'd be important for this group get a chance to see what our young people are doing and what they're doing collaboratively working within our own existing school system. So with that, Neil, I'll turn it over to you.
All right, thank you. So as you said, I'm a high school sophomore, and I've lived in Milwaukee my entire life. So having heard about this crisis, I wanted to know what students like myself, just the general public, could do to help. So today I'll be presenting on peer advocacy and public awareness as a means of preventing opioid overdoses. So since 2011, there have been nearly 2,000 overdoses caused by opioids in Milwaukee County. But what's even more shocking about the statistic is that I was completely unaware of it until about a couple months ago. And so realizing that I was completely unaware of this statistic, despite living in this city my entire life, I realized that there were other people like me, and I wanted to make a change to that. So I founded the Opioid Epidemic Awareness Campaign with the hopes of increasing general awareness through peer advocacy. So one of the aspects that I felt was very important is understanding what opioids are and how they interact with us at a cellular level. So opioids are used to treat pain when legally prescribed, and the way they work is they bind to opioid receptors on neurons, essentially disabling that neuron from sending a pain signal to the brain. So suddenly a trauma, for example a broken arm, no longer hurts and can be temporarily relieved. And so they are effective means of treating pain when legally prescribed. But as this statistic was earlier mentioned, 80% of heroin addicts start on prescription pills. So we see that even legally prescribed, they are extremely dangerous and can easily cause addiction. But most heroin addicts aren't using opioids to treat their broken arms. They're using them to get high. And that's how it interacts with the brain. So those same opioid receptors that you find on your neurons in your arm are found in your brain. Only here, instead of stopping pain signals, they create dopamine. So when opioids are present, it releases a rush of dopamine that is unnatural and quite honestly very dangerous. Because after even one pill, more of these opioid receptors are created within the brain. And so suddenly the addict needs more pills to achieve the exact same high. And furthermore, these pills become less of a high so much as getting by. So suddenly, if they stop using opioids, they build up a tolerance and a withdrawal that comes along with that. So as we see in this graphic, it's a cycle. It's a cyclical nature where opioid use causes more opioids to be created, and therefore those receptors demand more opioids. And so suddenly they're trapped in this cycle that they can't escape from, and that's known as addiction. So in conclusion, opioids can be used as a legal prescription pill, but this is incredibly dangerous because opioids are extremely addictive, and they become an addict's necessity. To an extent, drugs become the only thing that can make an addict happy when we're looking at it on a cellular level. So now that we understand how opioids interact with us at a cellular level, I think it's important to understand how they interact with us in our community. So when we look at the national statistics, since 1999, drug overdoses are on the rise. And this graph includes other drugs that are not necessarily opioids, for example, methamphetamine. But when we break down the drugs used in overdoses since 1999, 72% have been opioids. So even compared to methamphetamine, opioids show to be one of the most dangerous categories of drugs when we're looking at opioid overdoses. Specifically in our community, since 2011, there has been over a 200% increase in opioid overdoses. So as we see in 2011, there were 180 overdoses, whereas in 2017, there were 397. So something needed to be done, and that's what compelled me to make a change. And furthermore, when we look at the effects, the races affected by this drug, we realize that it's not just one demographic. It's not one age group, one gender, one race. And so that's why public awareness is truly so vital, because anybody and everybody can be directly affected by these pills. So we need to make sure that everybody within our community knows just how prevalent and pervasive this topic is and know how they can prevent addictions from forming. And I think at this point it's important to remember that we're discussing statistics, not statistics, but lives. So how do we fight it? Well, the first portion is learning about it. I believe at this point we should discuss opioid safety. So there are certain general guidelines that are handed to us when we're legally prescribed pills. Things such as not upping your own dose or not mixing with alcohol. And these are very good to look at, but what I want to focus on is rule number 8, dispose of any unused medications. So as I mentioned, the vast majority of opioid addicts begin on prescription medications, pills that were laying around the house from previous surgeries. And so we need to make sure that these drugs are safely disposed of. And quite honestly, I never really knew how that happened. I assumed they were just thrown away or flushed down the toilet. But I've learned this is incredibly dangerous. So I need to make sure that students like myself realize that drugs need to be disposed of at safe drug disposal locations, such as the ones listed. Once we've learned about opioid safety, I think it's important to advocate what we learned. So this includes just talking to your peers, talking to your friends, and raising general awareness. And lastly, I want to talk about supporting. So I want to address the addiction stigmas, which I know came up earlier. There is this sort of connotation or feeling that comes with addiction, that it's the sole fault of the user, and therefore the sole responsibility of the user to deal with. But when we have the flu, a disease, we go to see a doctor naturally. It just makes sense, because it can be treated with help from a medical professional. Well, when we look at the definition of a disease, it's a condition of the living animal that impairs normal functioning. So by definition, addiction is a disease. So it should be treated as such. I think we need to encourage addicts to reach out and seek help, because with help from a medical professional, addiction can be treated and addicts can recover before a fatal overdose occurs. So in conclusion, there are 3 ways to combat the epidemic for the general public. The first step is learning about opioid safety and how they're interacting with our community. The second step is teaching what we've learned. And the last step is supporting our community in its endeavors to fight this overwhelming crisis. I believe the youth can play a vital role in this epidemic, as we are the future of our city. But in order to make a difference, we first need to learn about the problem. And by learning about habits at this age, learning about drug disposal and opioid safety, we can make a difference. We can be the generation that evades the grasp of opioid overdoses. We can be the change to make the change. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, thank you, Neil. As you can see, everyone in this audience was as impressed as I was in terms of your presentation, and I think you'll make a big difference. And I think Commissioner Kowalik is probably going to ask for your resume later. Future Public Health Commissioner. But we're very appreciative for you coming in. Thank you, Neil.
Thank you.
Thank you.